Hello and welcome to the Indo Sport podcast. Will Slattery here with you, and this afternoon we are talking rugby. Simon Easterby has named the Ireland team for the final Six Nations game against Italy this weekend. He's made plenty of changes, and while a title seems a remote possibility at this juncture, you never know what could happen on a crazy Six Nations Saturday. If France beats Scotland, they will take home the title, but if they don't, it opens the door for not only Ireland but also England. So plenty to get stuck into this afternoon. I'm delighted to be joined for our chat by Cian Tracey, who's out near the airport in a hotel, almost time to take off for Rome. Cian, how are you?
Good, Will. Yeah, we thought we'd be kind of looking ahead to the final day, but we're actually still stuck in the French week. The fallout from the Antoine Dupont injury has really continued. People will, by the time they get to listen to this, will probably have seen Simon Easterby's comments hitting back, I suppose, at Fabien Galthie. Quite strong stuff. The French seem to have come out all week again and been basically building off Galthie's comments that he made in the post-match, and Ireland are not impressed at all, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, we'll circle back to that in a minute, because we're also joined by Eddie O'Sullivan as well, who we haven't got to check in with since the France game. And I know this probably feels like a fairly long post-mortem for listeners who's probably been consuming content all week looking back on that game. But Eddie, what did you make of it? What was your perspective on why the game completely got away from Ireland in particular in that second half?
It was a kind of a series of events that stacked together. Like it was a weird game. I mean, I looked at the stats, and the stats are all in Ireland's favour. It's the weirdest thing. Like we had nearly 60% possession. We kind of split territory. We had a same number of meters or a little more. We kicked about the same. We passed nearly 100 times more. We ran nearly 50 times more. They had 13 penalties, we had 6. They had 7 clean line breaks, we had 5. They had 9 offloads, we had 8. We had more turnovers, but we had a better tackle execution. They missed 23, we missed 16. So if we didn't get the score on that game, if you just handed those stats, you'd say, okay, maybe Ireland won it, maybe France won it. We'd probably lean into Ireland, but it would have been a close game. But the scoreboard defied all that. So I think when you look at games like that, you look at basically Ireland had really bad moments which cost them dearly, and France were ultra efficient when they got their chances. So to me, that was the kind of story of the game, and the momentum swings were in France's favour. I knew it. I mean, last week speaking on this podcast, I thought we will score tries against France, because the last 3 years we've averaged 4 tries a game. I thought we had them, but they defended exceptionally well. Credit where credit's due. But I knew after 20 minutes, when we had that relentless pounding of their goal line and we hadn't scored, I go, we're in trouble here, big time. And you could see the writing on the wall. And then the double whammy, McCarthy gets the card, we're down to 14. And after being almost drowning for the first 20 minutes, France are 5-0 up. And that's where the trouble started. But I thought we managed the second half of the first half, even though we got the try, we came back. Prendergast kicked a great penalty at half-time. We're in the lead, we're going into half-time, 1 score down, and we take the lead the start of the second half. Now we're in great position. And you say, well, okay, we've got momentum back here. Let's steady the ship. And then you have that catastrophic run of scores, around the yellow card. You have the O'Mahony clean out, which I think the referee got wrong. But let's say that penalty goes the other way and we go down and score. Now we're 2 scores up, and those momentum swingers were killers. Now, I'm not saying we played well. I'm not saying France played badly. I'm saying those momentum swings kind of really killed us off. And by the time Nash got back on the field, the game was probably over. We were kind of just keeping our head above water. And then the next try really killed us. I mean, the Jago try killed us completely. And then you had the Peno try from interception. And I kind of looked at the source of their tries. They scored 5 tries, and they were probably self-inflicted wounds. The Barry try was us defending on the McCarthy yellow on our goal line, 14 men. Actually, where Barry scored us, that's where Nash should have been. They ran it, they got us on the short side. The Boyd try, obviously O'Mahony clean out, that could have gone the other way. The second Barry try was a turnover at a ruck. We had 7 players trapped into their 5-minute channel, and we'd only 14 on the field, so we got skinned. The Jago try started with an overthrown line-out. That was a line-out to Ireland, went over the top. They got on it. And then the final try was the interception. For Amos intercepted. So when you look at the stats, we were right in there. When you look at the mistakes we made the big mistakes, and France were ultra efficient at punishing us. And literally, we're on that second yellow card, the Nash yellow card. That's where the game was ripped away from us. And I'm not taking that away from the French performance. It was ultra efficient. It was ultra aggressive. and Ireland didn't have any answers to it. And our defence, or their defence was excellent, but Ireland didn't run a smart attacking game against that defence. They kind of got us on the day, and we didn't adapt around it. So you stack it all up, the better team won. But I think Ireland kind of were architects of their own downfall in many cases.
Yeah, and one stat where they were comprehensively outplayed, it came up after about 25 minutes, was 22 entries. I think at that stage it had been 4 for Ireland with 0 points. And as you say, leaving that amount of chances on the table, which they did do against England in the first half. But again, England, not the quality of France, really made them pay as the game wore on. Cian, as I mentioned, you were out at the team hotel today. You know, you referred to Simon Easterby's press conference there, and came kind of hitting back at Fabien Galthie's fairly inflammatory comments on Saturday after Antoine Dupont's injury. Give us an idea of what Simon Easterby was saying around that, because people were kind of maybe not necessarily taken aback by Fabien Galthie's comments, because the French can be fairly fiery and passionate people. But certainly it's rare for an opposition coach to really target players and accuse them of kind of deliberately injuring someone. And, you know, we heard Andrew Porter talking during the week, kind of batting back those comments and kind of having to go back at Galthie to a degree. And Easterby, it seemed to be along similar lines today.
Yeah, I suppose to give a bit of context, Will, as a losing side last weekend, Ireland held their press conference first, which meant that we didn't get to put Galthie's comments to Simon Easterby afterwards. So this morning was the first time that Ireland's interim head coach has had the chance to respond to them. And look, it's no surprise really that he's angry. I'm going to read a line from him. And I'm quoting, "It's disappointing because the unfortunate thing is that people who don't really understand the game pick up on it," it being Galthie's comments, "and it creates a bit of a shitstorm where people are getting abuse." Now, Easterby went on to say that the players' family members have been targeted with that abuse as well. So it's just massively gotten out of hand. Even the French camp this week seemed to have piled the pressure on. Just absolutely furious. I think a lot of it is down to the fact that it is the golden boy of French rugby, the golden boy of rugby. But I think most people who aren't French do believe that it was a rugby incident. And to hear that like the Irish players are getting abuse, and look, they're going to become public enemy number one now when the next time they play a French team or if they play in France. But to hear that that's extended into family members, and again, this is according to Simon Easterby, is just so disappointing. So yeah, the fallout continues, Will, in massively so.
Yeah, Eddie, you've obviously been in press conferences, many press conferences. You know, emotions are high, a big talking point, a flashpoint, you're asked about it and you have to give your opinion on it. But what did you make of Fabien Galthie's intervention? I think Simon Easterby is fair enough to come back at it, because I think, as Cian said, the consensus seems to be, and looking at the footage, you would back that up, that it was an accidental injury to Antoine Dupont and it wasn't a particularly reckless clear out.
Yeah, it's terribly disappointing to have this going on, because Galthie should know a lot better. Now, okay, let's kind of cut him a little bit of slack here. Not a lot, a little bit of slack. I cut him as one. Okay, he's lost probably the most influential player he has, no question about it. The best player in the world, probably, arguably, in a nasty incident where he's going to be out now for probably 9 months. It's a massive blow to France. That said, I suppose the other thing I cut him slack on him was straight after the game. You know, he's emotional, he's upset. He knows the seriousness of the event. But he has to understand his position, that as the head of the opposition team, that he can't basically accuse players of foul play, intentional foul play to hurt another player. That's a terrible accusation to make. Now, he could have probably backed off it a bit in the cold light of day and, you know, kind of damped it down, but he didn't. You know, kind of things doubled down during the week in France. So it's a pity now that Simon has to come out and say this, but I believe he does have to come out and defend the team, particularly now in the world we live in. These stuffs leak into, you know, it gets into personal situations, and I say family members been abused. Like, it's obscene, really. But Galthie is responsible for this, and he should have been the better man and realised, even if he spoke, I suppose, too harshly in the heat of the moment after the game, he should have tamped it down during the week. But it doesn't seem to me that's the way the French have gone with it. To me, it's terribly disappointing. It's very unfair, and I back Simon Easterby completely, pushing back on this, because again, I'm watching rugby a long time. I watched it over and over. There's no doubt in my mind it was a complete accident. These things do happen, and you know, to turn that into like a summary execution of the two boys is ludicrous in my view. And you know, World Rugby might have a role here. Again, they're very quick to point out when players have, you know, foul play or where coaches criticise referees. But when a coach comes out and accuses opposition players of intentionally injuring one of their players, I mean, World Rugby should know the inflammatory nature of that and should be able to step in and you know, say this is not acceptable. Like I agree with World Rugby stepping in when referees are getting abused, so they should do the same when players are getting abused.
That's an interesting point. I will be interested to see if anything does come out of it, because you say it's a very serious charge. It's, you know, deliberately injuring a player, you know, could potentially end his career if it goes wrong. And
well, you could, sorry, well, you could, if you did it in the street, if you did that in the street, intentionally hurt to somebody like that, you'd be in court. You know, you've broken the law if you intentionally did that to somebody. So it's kind of like accusing them of a grievous bodily harm kind of thing, you know, without and intentionally doing so. That's why it's so inflammatory.
And I was interested to read some.
And sorry, Will, just to come in on that, I think Simon Easterby has hit the nail on the head here when he says that, look, most people listening to this podcast will be big rugby fans, but there's lots of casual supporters who will just have tuned in for the big match last weekend, and they'll see the French head coach giving out about alleged foul play. It's very, very damaging for the two players. I was at the press conference on Tuesday as well with Andrew Porter, and he was livid. Like, he did well to keep his emotions in check, and I thought it was a smart move by the RFU to put him up so that he could explain his actions. Now, obviously, he was the one who came in behind Tadhg Beirne and sort of changed the course of action in terms of Tadhg Beirne's clear out. But I thought Andrew Porter spoke really well, just as Simon Easterby did right now, because Eddie's right. Like, Simon Easterby has to come out to bat for his team here. He hasn't had a chance. In case people are wondering why are we still talking about this a few days on from the game, like I said at the very start, he hasn't had a chance to address this. And as the figurehead, without any Farrell, of this team, that's his job, to come out and protect his players. I thought he spoke really well.
Yeah, and you mentioned the fact that, I can't remember, with Eddie or Cian who said it, kind of the French not tempering it down, because I read some quotes from Roman Intimac, kind of harking back to the ringrose, you know, him and Intimac's different suspension, so that was treated and given out about that, and then weighing in on the Dupont injury and kind of, you know, kind of referring to it as, oh, look, I have my own opinion. I won't be saying what that is, but you kind of know what I'm thinking. And World Rugby need to really have a look at this. So I feel like this is going to go on for when they play next year in Paris. It's going to be a huge talking point. A bit of bad blood between the teams for sure. Eddie, to go to the team selection for Italy, then some substantial changes in the backline. Mac Hansen and James Lowe return on the wing from injury. Nash and Osborne dropping out of the 23 entirely. Gary Ringrose back from his suspension. He moves into the 13 jersey. Henshaw goes to 12. Bundyaki goes to the bench. Jack Crowley gets a start amid kind of murmurings of a big contract offer from Leicester, which we can touch on in a few minutes. Sam Prendergast drops to the bench. James Ryan comes in for Joe McCarthy, potentially paying the price for that fairly ludicrous yellow card he picked up. Jack Conan coming in for Peter O'Mahony. McCarthy and O'Mahony dropping to the bench. And we also have Tadhg Furlong and Jack Boyle coming onto the bench. So all in all, a hefty amount of changes. And the thought did occur to me, Eddie, like, that's a much more robust team than what took to the field last Saturday. How Simon Easterby would have loved to call upon that 23 to take on France.
Yeah, that's why I don't think it's that dramatic, the changes, because Hansen and Lowe would have started last weekend if they were fit. Obviously, Lowe got injured in the warm-up, but Hansen was out of injury. It's distinctly possible as well that Gary Ringrose would have started that game had he not been suspended. So 3 of those changes in the backs are pretty much not really changes, in the sense that this is fella's been dropped. The big one, obviously, is Crowley being brought in for Prendergast, and we could talk about that. But just looking at the other selections, I think obviously McCarthy, you know, paying the price for the mistake on the yellow card, and I think, you know, Conan is playing out of his skin. I understand why they would bring Conan in. That was probably a selection for France, or sorry, for Italy. You know, O'Mahony started against France, and the interesting one again is Rob Herring not featuring, Gus McCarthy coming in, and Jack Boyle coming in for Healy. So you can see kind of chinks of light there where they're thinking we've got to start thinking about the future here. But I don't think the change is as dramatic as they would seem. As I would think 3 of those backline changes are definitely would have been guys who would have started last weekend. And I just think it's definitely a stronger team than last week if you look at it from across the backline alone. And I think McCarthy is probably, kicking himself for that mistake, and Ryan gets a shot now. So nothing really strange there. The most interesting for me is the young bucks on the bench. Jack Boyle and McCarthy coming in, a kind of sign of there's a mood of change coming down the track here when this Six Nations is over.
Cian, I guess one of the things I look at from the team, though, is more in the sense that there's been a lot of talk since the French game about the need for speed in the Irish backline, the lack of power in the Irish team as a whole. And I look at the team like that when it's restored to close to its full complement, and I think that's a bloody good team. And like Ireland competing with their strongest deck can definitely go toe to toe with any team in the world, notwithstanding the fact they don't have certain athletes of certain sizes or power or pace. That's been the case throughout this era. But when they get all these guys on the pitch, they're still up there for me. I didn't agree with some of the doomsday comments and the need for massive overhauls and finding these untapped gems to beef up the team. Obviously, it would be great to have a Bielbiere in the team or a Miafu coming off the bench. But we've already seen that this Ireland team can compete with the best. And these guys coming back into the team gives it a completely different complexion, in my opinion.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you, and I agree with the points that Eddie has just made as well. I suppose the broader issue, Will, is in terms of depth. When James Lowe and Matt Hansen aren't there, that probably got found out a little bit last weekend. Look, I was uncomfortable with the idea of playing Jamie Osborne, who in my opinion will end up as a really top class 12, but playing him on the wing, and that just didn't work out. Calvin Nash had a tough day obviously and had the yellow card as well. We had a little bit of news actually on Calvin Nash at the press conference this morning. Munster fans may want to not listen to the next 10 seconds, but it seems that he picked up an injury this week and he's gone to hospital for scans on his ankle. So for Munster, for the rest of their season, they'll be hoping that isn't too serious. So he isn't travelling with the squad as a travelling reserve this weekend. But back to your original point, Will, look, I think James Lowe and Matt Hansen, we know, are two of Ireland's big X-factor players, for want of a better term. And it's just that when those guys aren't there, I think Ireland looked a little bit more clunky in attack. I think Eddie is right to highlight Ringrose. To look further onto the bench, Will, Tyke Furlong back is huge. Even if Ireland could get 20 minutes off him, how they would love to have had him off the bench against France. So I agree with your overall point that this is probably a stronger 23 than took to the pitch last weekend against France.
Yeah, the Furlong one is interesting. Obviously, like, it's almost too little too late for Simon Easterby in terms of this Six Nations, but it's an important 20 minutes if he gets, or 30 minutes he gets off the bench, because the next 2 weeks after this, Leinster are going to be in South Africa, so there won't be any frontline players going. And then after that, it's Harlequins coming to Croke Park, and if they win that, another knockout game the following week. So certainly from a club rugby perspective, they'll be keen to see him take the field this weekend, and it's a welcome return on that front. Eddie, you touched on Jack Crowley getting into the team. Obviously, the Crowley-Prendergast back and forth has been a hot topic throughout the Six Nations. And this selection coming the week that it's kind of coming out in the media, I know Cian was writing about it, that Leicester have apparently tabled a huge offer to have him come to the Premiership and replace Andre Pollard, who's returning to South Africa. That's kind of bubbling around in the background. Maybe we'll deal with that piece of it first. Like, it's hard to know whether these things will come to fruition or it's just got a bit of kite flying around contract negotiations. But it's certainly coming at an interesting time when there's a massive swathe of the country up in arms about how he's been treated by the national team management. There's a sense that he might not get offered a national contract, so the contract differential in terms of money could be pretty sizable between what he would get in England and what he might be getting at his next deal, which is up at the end of this season. So there's lots of kind of things percolating in the background, as well as who plays this weekend.
Well, if it's a kite flying exercise, this Leicester offer, that's a pretty big kite to be flying. I mean, it's a serious offer from what I can tell. If it exists, I'm assuming there has to be something to it. These things don't just come out of thin air, particularly in this part of the world. You might sometimes see it in France, actually, but certainly not in the home countries. But it's a complicated one, because I also think there's a shift here in the Irish management. I said a few weeks ago on this podcast that I thought that they had picked their man, that Prendergast was their man. They were going to him. He was the younger guy. They were backing him. He was ticking all the boxes. And unfortunately for Crowley, unless there was a sudden shift, Crowley was going to be the number 2. That sudden shift may have happened in this decision. I think that there's a little bit of me thinking that I'm surprised in some ways they haven't gone again with Prendergast. I know he had a bad second half, and there are flaws in his game. He's not the perfect player that are beginning to show up. One is obviously he's been targeted on defence. teams are running over him. He's trying to make tackles, but he's still not winning the collisions, which, you know, he's not that big. And the second one then is that he's inclined to run with the ball, and when he runs with the ball, he's a bit of a liability if he doesn't make a line break. So he's very good at making line breaks, but when he gets caught in possession, he's liable to be turned over. And they're the two big things I see. Now, they're pretty expensive things, actually, in Test rugby. But I still think it's a sea shift from my view was that, you know, they put the debate to bed early in the Six Nations by picking him over Crowley. But now that debate is back in the hopper. We can now have that debate all over again. And if Crowley goes in to Rome next Saturday and lights it up, the debate is back on again. We're back to the Tony Ward, Ollie Campbell discussion all over again, you know, or the Raj and Humps one. But and I think this is different than the Raj and Humps one because they're so close in age. This is going to go down the track here. As regards Crowley, if he gets this big offer, firstly the RFU will be insane not to give him a central contract and give him a really good bump in his salary or whatever he's on. It'd be a disaster for Irish rugby if he took it. If he steps out of the Irish game, it's an absolute disaster for Irish rugby because we know the difficulties of an overseas player trying to make it back to play with Ireland and the different schedules they go through and their management and their how they fit in. So the RFU, if this is real, the RFU have got to find a way of keeping him. And if we lose him, it'll be a huge setback. And I think, again, to wrap it up, the debate is back on the table after the selection.
Cian, it would be a PR disaster for the IRFU. I could see Munster fans marching on the IRFU headquarters like Connacht supporters did back in the day when it was on the cards that Connacht might be disbanded. I just think the backlash would be so severe that I think it would like split Irish rugby, you know, apart. Like, do you see this move as a real live option, or is it kind of one of those contract offers, as I said, that gets floated and then ultimately it ends up with Crowley signing a good contract and staying put?
Do I see it as a live option? Yes, I do, Will. Do I think it will happen? No, I don't. And I think two things can be true at once. Look, what I will say is I understand why people would be sceptical of the offer, the level of the offer that's been on the table. But my sources have indicated that it is in the region of 600,000 sterling a season, which is at least double, I think, what Jack Crowley would be able to get if he stayed in Ireland. Rugby's not all about money, but if he was to get a 3-year deal or whatever it is from Leicester on that kind of money, that's a lot of money to set a guy up for, you know, the future. All that said, and Simon Easterby has addressed that today, that he doesn't think it will be a distraction this week. I think the issue probably stems from the fact that this time last year, Jack Crowley would have looked odds on to get Johnny Sexton's central contract. He was the starting 10. He played every minute of Ireland's winning Six Nations campaign, and obviously then things started to change in November. So Munster, my understanding is that Munster have in the last few weeks, because like let's not forget, Will, that it's very late in the day to be having these sort of conversations, particularly for your marquee players. You would much rather have this tied up before Christmas. And that's another point to this. This is how Leicester are able to, as I said, my understanding, to offer him this kind of money is because Premiership clubs have brought in the salary cap, but they're allowed one marquee player outside of that. And that just sums up how highly Leicester rate Jack Crowley, that they're willing to spend this money and make him their marquee signing. But Munster, my understanding is, had offered Jack Crowley a contract. Eddie's saying there about the central contract. I don't believe that will happen. For a couple of different reasons, because I think if you were giving Jack Crowley a central contract, you nearly have to give Sam Prendergast one as well, because they're vying for the same position. I just don't see two out halves being on central contracts. So that has obviously complicated the issue in terms of Munster being able to offer Crowley what he probably feels he's worth, Will. And what the IRFU, I think, are probably going to do is we have pony contracts, which is players of national interest, which essentially means that if Munster were to offer a player X and Y, then the IRFU could come in and top that up. And look, I think David Humphreys has a job in his hands now as performance director over the next few weeks, because you're right, Will, this has to be sorted. Jack Crowley, like, let's just look at it through the Munster lens for the moment. Like, there's a lot of change coming down the track in Munster, with Peter O'Mahony retiring, Conor Murray leaving at the end of the season, a new head coach in Clayton Macmillan coming in, who I would imagine wants to base a lot of his next 3 years around Jack Crowley. Of course he does, as his starting 10. And Eddie's right, the debate hasn't gone away. And if you were Jack Crowley, I think you'd be feeling pretty sore about how everything has played out over the last few months. Not really through any fault of his own. It's just that the Irish coaches seem to have rated Sam Prendergast better. But it's absolutely essential that the IRFU find a way, I think, to keep Jack Crowley in the country, because like you said, Will, I think there'd be absolutely uproar if he was to leave. So just to go back to your initial point, I think it's absolutely a live option, because the money that's allegedly involved is eye-watering, but I just don't think it will happen when it comes down to it.
It would be such
They wouldn't have to match the money, really, because we know that there's the tax back situation, which helps things in Ireland's favour, but they're certainly going to have to bump it up. I think again about the centrally contracted, the rules and regulations the RFU have put in place. They're their own rules. They can change them if they want to. You have a very unique situation here. You have two world-class fly halves around the same age, and they've got to find a way to manage to keep them both in the country. And the setup is actually pretty good, because one is in Leinster and one is in Munster. So they're not competing with each other like the Byrne brothers were in Leinster, and so on. So it's up to the RFU to fix this. It's not a short. They have plenty of money. There's not an issue with money. And I don't care how they structure the contract, whether it's a national contract or a Munster contract with a top up. The bottom line for a professional player is what's the number that's underlined at the bottom of the contract, and they have to find a way to stop them from going to Leicester, because it will be a catastrophe. But it's very fixable, and if they have to bend a few rules, come to get around it in terms of the contract and stuff, so be it. Now, David Humphreys has all power in that situation. He can do that. I've no doubt he will. I can't see it. I can't see it coming to fruition, or it would be a huge self-inflicted wound on Irish rugby if Crowley had to, for some reason, left to win to Leicester.
Yeah, it would be a disaster on three fronts. It would be disastrous for the national team, who, as you say, at the moment are cultivating or trying to cultivate two strong international quality out halves, albeit we didn't see it really managed that way during the Six Nations. It would be a disaster for Munster, just as a team, as Cian mentioned, Clayton McMillan coming in, your centrepiece, your focal point of your attack, and one of your kind of marquee faces to put on season tickets and sell them. And it would also just be a disaster in terms of the fans, like for Munster supporters who are getting disenfranchised by Leinster dominating the national picture, to lose one of their key guys over this sort of dispute would be, it would be a triple whammy, and it would be hard for Munster supporters to stomach watching the national team in the short term if Jack Crowley was kicking goals on a Saturday for Leicester in the Premiership Cup while Ireland are playing in the Six Nations at the same time. But
coming to Munster to knocking Munster out of the European Cup.
Yeah. Cian,
and there's another strand to this, is that, look, when we think of Leicester Tigers, we think of the old Leicester Tigers. This is not the Leicester Tigers of old in terms of the position that they're in. They're looking for a new head coach at the moment. Ironically, Graham Rowntree was one of the names that was put forward, but it looks like Paul Gustard is going to get that job. So they're going through a pretty big transition period themselves. So he's not walking into, a club who's automatically going to be competing for European titles or the Premiership for the next couple of years. And I think that's worth remembering as well.
Yeah, for sure. When he was offered the chance to go to La Rochelle, I know he was a younger player and the circumstances were different. It was like to go to learn from Ronan O'Gara, play for one of the best teams in Europe. That sounded, if that was the option on the table now, I'd say he'd probably take it if that was what was an offer. But as you say, Leicester, lots of upheaval over the last number of years. I think this has got, between Matt O'Connor, Michael Cheika, Richard Cockrell, Dan McKellar, now Paul Gustard coming in, Steve Borthwick was there as well. I think they've almost averaged a coach a season for the last 6 or 7 years. So it's not that beacon of stability that it was for a long time, nor are they in the top probably 3 teams in England at the moment. So it would probably be a mostly financially based decision, but when the numbers are so eye-watering, you can see why it would turn ahead. Cian, you mentioned PONY, Player of National Importance. That's a new acronym, I must say. Has that been floating around for a while? Is this a new buzzword to add to the rugby kind of jargon list?
Player of National Interest, as opposed to importance. I better get your interest. Sorry. So, yeah, it is a relatively new thing. I think Eddie would probably know a lot more about this than me back when he was head coach. I'm sure there's been plenty of times over the years where the IRFU have topped up certain players' salaries. Like, ultimately, they're the ones paying the bills at the end of the day. But I suppose it's sort of come to light more so in the last few years, because there is just so much debate around central contracts. And at the moment, Will, next season the only non-Leinster players who not are going to be on central contracts are Tyburn at Munster, no one from Ulster because Jacob Stockdale and Ian Henderson have come off theirs, and in Connacht you have Bundy Aki and Mac Hansen is going on one in the summer. So I would say the pony contracts are for players who are on the next rung down, massively important players to Ireland who aren't quite on those central contracts, which means that, look, if Munster were able to offer, like, let's just say 250, 300,000 to whatever player, the IRFU could come in and top that up. And I think Luke Fitzgerald, Will, on our podcast has spoken about this over the years, that there's a perception around there that the central contracts are unbelievably lucrative, and obviously they're the most lucrative contracts in the country. But I'm pretty sure he maintained that during his playing days that there was guys in Leinster who could have been potentially on almost the same money, and probably those pony deals that we're talking about. So players of national interest.
Players of national interest. I feel like who has the most pony contracts is now going to be the big kind of Reddit talking point and in WhatsApp groups rather than central contracts. But it does seem to be a good fix, and they've obviously brought in that new rule that I think the province has foot the bill for 30% is a Cian of the deals going forward. So, but allied with that you can maybe top up some other deals from other players that maybe go some way towards rebalancing it. Just to tie off the out half point, Eddie, you mentioned kind of the battle being alive now after this selection. Like, I couldn't agree more. I think it's a huge opportunity to Jack Crowley, considering how the Six Nations ended and considering how well Jack Crowley played off the bench against England in the only real proper game time he got it out half. His kind of stature as a player has grown exponentially by not playing out half in the meantime as this debate has kind of raged on. So if he can go out and play really well, even if it's just against Italy, and Ireland look good, which is what is a very strong team, the next window, when that opens up, it'll be a rife debate again. I think it's one of the most important games of Jack Crowley's career actually this weekend.
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of discussion around the fact that he was badly treated during the Sixers. I don't necessarily buy into that. It's always tricky as a coach. You can only pick one guy at the 10 shirt, and you've got two guys to pick from. The guy that doesn't get picked, you can always make a case from him being picked. But I think, to be fair, Prendergast has done really, really well through the autumn, and again he's done well in the sixth side. He's had a bad half, so we can't just throw the guy under the bus for that. He does have his weaknesses, as we've seen, got exposed a bit when you get up to the test level, and that does happen. But having said that, again, the great side of the argument is Crowley has been outstanding as well. So they're both playing extremely well. So you're right, this is an incredible opportunity for Crowley to really make a statement and say, like, don't forget about me, I'm still here. And like, if Crowley nails it on the weekend, and it could well happen, because you're right, this is a very strong Irish team, and we can talk about Italy in a minute. This Italian team are ripe for a shellacking. And if Crowley is a central role in that and he's just pulling the strings, it makes the argument again that there's nothing in it between the two of them, which wasn't the case during the Six Nations up to now, because the selectors like Simon Easterby were backing Prendergast as their man going forward. And I got that sense when they doubled down on him at the start of the Six Nations, he was their man. And maybe there's a rethink around that now. And that's Crowley's opportunity. That's the nature of the beast.
And if he plays really well, if he's getting a 9 out of 10 in the ratings, Cian, on Saturday, that's probably another 100 grand onto this pony deal he might be able to command.
Yeah, and look, Leicester's the only ones who've come to light, Will, but I would imagine there's plenty of clubs very interested in signing Jack Crowley. So look, he will have a decision to make. I'd imagine he's parked it this week, certainly. But I totally agree with yourself and Eddie. And look, I know it feels like a long time ago now because so much has happened, but think back to Jack Crowley's last performance for Munster in the Heineken Cup against Northampton in Franklin's Gardens. That was as close to a 10 out of 10 performance as you're going to get. Absolutely exceptional. So I think that's what made, from his point of view, it's so disappointing that, look, he's come off the bench in the last 3 games, but he's come on at fullback. He came on at centre last weekend. He absolutely doesn't want to go down the Kieran Frawley route and becoming a jack of all trades for Ireland, even though he obviously will be the one covering those positions. You have Bundy Aki on the bench, but I don't think you're going to see Sam Prendergast slotting in a 12 or fullback if it comes to it. So I couldn't agree with you more, Will. He's surrounded by a very strong Ireland team. That's the starting Irish backline, the first choice backline that they've gone with. He's got a very strong pack in front of him. And look, I think Eddie is right. I know we'll get on to talk about Italy, but you can only beat the opposition that's in front of you. And if Jack Crowley steps up and delivers a really confident performance that he did throughout the course of last year when Ireland won the Six Nations, then there's big decisions to make going forward, because I agree with you. I think this debate is going to rage on for a long time yet.
And it's the last picture we'll have of the campaign as well. I know it's Italy, but it'll kind of stay in the mind's eye for that reason, because it will be the last game that people see before we switch back to club focus. Cian, I guess it wasn't flagged beforehand as something that would be an issue, but I do remember when Ireland beat Scotland in the Six Nations 2 years ago, when they had all those injuries and you had Josh van der Flier throwing into the line out, and Stuart Hogg did this massive presentation before the game for his 100th cap. And I remember coming on afterwards and saying that is a distraction that should be done outside of that game. You're going into a big battle. But I do think Ireland kept it pretty low key, to be fair. Like, the guys ran out at the start of the game and then the team followed pretty much immediately afterwards. They didn't even show Peter O'Mahony's exit on television. Like, it wasn't as if the game was held up for a moment's applause after 15 minutes or something like that. So I actually understand the kernel of his points, but I actually don't think Ireland did over-egg it externally. But I did find it interesting how much it was mentioned in the aftermath of, oh, we couldn't do it for the guys. And you're thinking, is that the big focus now? Is it not that you've lost the Six Nations? So I find it an interesting point. Not that I necessarily agree with it all.
I'm glad you mentioned the TV cameras not picking up Peter O'Mahony walking off the pitch. I thought that was crazy. Look, I know it might seem like a really small thing, but for the millions of people who were watching on TV, they didn't get to see the unbelievable ovation that he got in the stadium. I know you were there as well, Will. And why Ireland announced it the previous week as opposed to the week of the game. They put the three lads up for interview. They said their piece. And even Caelan Doris had said that there was actually more of a focus put on the 50 cappers at the jersey presentation on the Thursday night at the team hotel. Look, maybe they were trying to tap into motivation. I have a theory that the IRFU announced it because they wanted to get the crowd even into the game more often. I think there has been too many times with the Aviva where it's been a little bit sleepy. It was an early kickoff, try and get people into their seats early, make it a brilliant atmosphere, which it was, to be fair. Now, a lot of that was down to the unbelievable French fans. But look, I agree with Eddie, did it make any material difference to the end result? I don't think so. And I think it's interesting to go back to your wider point that Cian Healy is the one who isn't playing this weekend, so he bows out at 137 caps. I think it's the right decision to have Jack Boyle. I don't think there's anyone snapping at Conor Murray's heels. I know Caelan Blade is in the squad, but in terms of the wider picture, I'm not quite sure if he's going to be a long-term answer at scrum half. And then you have Peter O'Mahony. And just one point I'd like to make on that, Will, is not a great look for Ryan Baird, I would say. It's been a very, very frustrating and strange campaign again for Ryan Baird. I think the narrative that certainly I would have in my head around Baird, that we're still waiting for him to take off in terms of Test rugby, continues, because I think there's no doubt that Simon Easterby and the Ireland coaches have one eye on the future, particularly by naming Gus McCarthy and Jack Boyle on the bench, because you easily could have had Cian Healy and Rob Herring. I'm at the hotel at the moment, like you said at the start, Will, and I've seen both Rob Herring and Cian Healy are travelling with the squad, so it would have been easy to play them. So I'd be very disappointed if I was Ryan Baird not to be making even into the 23 this weekend.
There's a broader point here, I think, that we didn't really address at the start of the championship, because we were going for the three-peat, and there was a grand slam on the line, and it was all hands to the pump, and let's go after it. And when we lose last week, suddenly people pivot away, and there are a few valid points about this team going forward. If you take the following players, O'Mahony, Healy, Murray, they're all gone now. So that's three. Furlong, Phelan, Tyke Byrne, Van der Flier, Jack Conan, Gibson Park, Bundy Aki, Robbie Henshaw, Gary Ringrose, and James Rhoda. That's 13 players. The next World Cup will all be well into their 30s. They're all 30 or older at the moment. So there's going to have to be a look at now after this championship is gone. But we're just 2.5 years out of a World Cup, and that team can't go to the World Cup as it sits. There's just too many old guys in it.
I expect that. But I think that, like they did that with Johnny Sexton the last time. I expect when we get to the World Cup, the team will be pretty similar to what we see this Saturday. I don't think there's that much obvious talent ready to break through and take a green jersey. The problem with that, Will, is that you look at the age profile. Tyke Furlong will be 34, Finlay Bealham will be 35, Tyke Byrne will be 35, Van der Flier will be 34, Conan will be 35, Gibson Park will be 35, Bundy Aki will be 37.
Robbie Henshaw will be 33, Gary Ringo's 32, James Lowe will be 35. Like, those numbers are not great numbers for a World Cup. And that's, if you include the 3 boys who stepped away, that's 13 of our regular Saturday 23. So it's over half the team are going to be the wrong side of 30 substantially. And you might make the argument about some of them, like Gibson Park, scrum half, age isn't that important. But I mean, it is, we find ourselves now 2.5 years out of a World Cup. And you have to look at potentially a major reconstruction going to the World Cup. Now, I'm not trying to hit the alarm bell here, but it's not something we addressed at the start of the championship because we were in a position to potentially win a Grand Slam, and you're not going to go down that rabbit hole with a Grand Slam on the table, but that's gone now. So it might be time to pivot away and look at it, not maybe for this weekend, but at the end of the championship, what's the next move for Ireland with that age profile?
They're very stark numbers when you outline them like that. Even England in 2003, they had a couple of old stagers, but I don't think even their team was quite as old as that when they got to the finish line. So yeah, like that's why that summer tour, when a lot of guys are away in the Lions tour, a lot of those senior guys in their 30s are on the way in the Lions tour. Simon Easterby will have a big task about identifying and bringing through some guys. Cian, like, it's funny because Eddie listed through so many players there, and when you hear the age they will be by 2027, I know we've kind of tried to put a moratorium on World Cup talk for the most part, but what strikes me about that list of players is more so that there's no obvious, as I can see, there's a couple of guys maybe, but there's not that many obvious contenders to come in and take up the mantle from some of these people. Like, obviously John McCarthy's not starting this weekend, maybe slot him in for Ty Byrne. Jamie Osborne's a coming guy in the centre, but there's a lot of other positions where Ireland don't have ready-made depth, quality to replace the impact a lot of these players have made.
Yeah, I think you're right, Will. And I know we spent a lot of time talking about central contracts, but I think if you were to go through right now, or sorry, at least from next season, because Mac Hansen is going on to one. If you were to go through who's on central contracts from next season, I think you'll pretty much see, all things being equal in terms of fitness, and that Ireland's starting 15 at the next World Cup, because that's when the contracts pretty much bring them up to. I think you're right to highlight the summer tour to Georgia and Portugal. I know that hasn't been announced yet, but that's certainly the plan. That's when you'll start to see the pivot, because by the time Ireland are next together, we'll be in Chicago to face the All Blacks. Andy Farrell will be back from his Lions sabbatical, and I think then maybe we'll start to see maybe a couple of different faces. But I agree with your point, Will, that there aren't loads of lads banging on the door here trying to get in. So I know you can make the case for certain guys. Tommy O'Brien is another guy, maybe possibly a couple of the Munster lads kicking on, but by and large I think the team is the team, and it's probably slightly concerning. I would agree with Eddie in terms of the age profile.
Yeah, it's funny because when I went through the team earlier and was kind of waxing lyrical about how this is a much stronger team than last weekend and how they can still compete at the top table, I was very much focusing on the here and now. And now, having heard all the ages they're going to be in 2 years' time, it does make for stark, I suppose, stark reading. And, it's kind of also focuses in on like this bountiful period of Six Nations titles at under 20 level hasn't yielded the amount of international prospects you would have hoped to, considering when in times past where, say, France have won a couple of World Cups at that age grade, they've brought through huge numbers from those teams that have been extremely impactful at the top end. Whereas maybe it's the nature of the 4-club system that it's kind of stymied some guys' development, but probably would have hoped to get a few more prospects out of those teams into the international 23.
It's the downside of the club system we have, and there's lots of upsides to our system, but the opportunities, there's only 4 teams, and to get opportunities for young players in important games like Heineken Cup games or playoff games, it's so hard to do it because you're putting your best foot forward and you're going with your war horses in those days. So it is. I mean, Leinster probably the only team that get to do it because the depth they have, they can rotate their team practically every week in the ORC. But even then, when it comes down to the important games, they're going to put their best foot forward. So it is a trick. That is one of the downsides. Whereas France, they've got 14 teams basically to guys get experience. England have 10 teams. So it is a bit of a problem, but it is something that I guess there was no point in talking about for the championship, but it's something worth chatting to now after the Six Nations, particularly, is where this team goes in terms of their age profile and who's coming through to fill the slots. And effectively, this has to happen in the next year, really, if you're talking about a World Cup.
Yeah, and if you even look back
just to come in on that, Will, can Sorry, can I just come in on that just to not make it all doom and gloom? And I think if Andy Farrell was listening in on this conversation, he would point to guys who have been blooded over the last while. Your Sam Prendergast, your Jamie Osborne, Gus McCarthy, Jack Boyle, Thomas Clarkson. So it's not all doom and gloom, and I think they have started rejuvenating the team. Just I think it's worth pointing that out, that they have started to bring through some of those previous successful under-20s teams.
It's funny you say that though, Keane, because Andy Farrell remember he had pointed comments in November. He was like, "Oh, we don't have all these young players ready to come through." I remember we were talking about it on the left wing. We were like, Jesus, that's very surprised that the Ireland coach would come out and say that after a period where there's been a lot of underage success. So while he might say, "Oh, we blooded these guys and these guys," he also kind of said something similar to himself in November.
Yeah, it's hard to get the opportunity. To be fair to him as well, I've been in that position. It's hard to give these opportunities to young guys. It's the difficulty is the Six Nations. You've got to get results. It's all that matters in the Six Nations. And then the autumn, you're facing teams like New Zealand and South Africa. So if you get it wrong there, you're going to get your ass handed to you on a plate. So the difficulty is trying to get the opportunities to do it. And this summer tour is an opportunity. But I suppose, they do have to push this out now sooner rather than later, because some of those guys will be the wrong side of the 30s mark come the World Cup. And he has done some, but you're right about that, Cian. He has done some, but you have to push him out the nest at some point and say, no, go for it in a big game, And how many of those can you afford to do? So it is getting time to start making those shifts now. And you're right, there has been some of it, but you think now it's a point where it's got to really ramp up.
Yeah, and even if you just look to the 2023 Junior World Cup final, like Sam Prendergast started that for Ireland, he's obviously come into the Ireland team. But if you look at the French team in comparison, like Hugo Ardou, the second row, was involved at the weekend. Oscar Jegu was involved at the weekend. Theo Adesogabi, the winger, has been playing throughout the Six Nations. You have Nicolas Duportier, Baptiste Junot, to name a few others who've already been capped at senior level. Like, I suppose they've had more opportunities at club level because of their system, but they've come through very, very quickly. So it's just before we finish up, guys, or as we get to the end, Cian, are we saying there's no chance of a late, surprising Six Nations three-peat? Are we just completely discounting it? What Ireland need to happen is France to slip up at home to Scotland, and England not to get a bonus point victory in Wales. They can win, but not with a bonus point to allow Ireland to overtake them. People are saying Scotland haven't had their mad moment yet. Is it a possibility that France are already celebrating? They've already taken the foot off the gas. You see the Scottish team named today. There is a lot of quality there. Any little hope for Ireland fans?
I hope so, Will. Given that I'm on my way over there at the moment. I thought it was interesting to read Fabien Galthie's comments this morning, pointing out how they have the Latin in them, and that French sides over the years have had I'm paraphrasing here, have had the tendency to take their eye off the ball. And I agree with you, it's a good Scottish team, but wow, when I look at the bench that they've named, that wouldn't give me much hope from an Irish perspective, particularly when you look, France have gone 7-1 again, and it's the age-old thing with Scotland. I just don't think they'll be able to live with the physicality of this French side, particularly with what they're going to roll off the bench. So unfortunately, slim hopes, Will, but if you're telling me there's a chance, we'll cling on to that until there is no chance.
I'm just thinking of the Dumb and Dumber meme. So you're saying there's a chance, like the 7-1 split, doubling down on that, like, is in. I know Oscar
tripling down, third game in a row.
Oscar Jegu played great, to be fair to him, as a centre, given he's a flanker. But the idea that would embolden you to do it again, I think it would be the last thing he ought to be doing, Eddie. Like, as a coach, I think I don't know if the end justified the means, but I don't know if the route they got there was necessarily because of 7-1.
Yeah, it's 7-1 is great until it's not. And it's not then when you have two backs injured and now you've got it forward in the middle of the field. And they got away with it against Ireland. The way the game was unfolding, it didn't matter. But can you imagine if it's a one-score game and forwards in the middle of the field and Ireland have a scrum 5 minutes from your goal line? Like they're the nightmare scenarios you end up facing when you have only one back on the bench. And you get that. And the attritional nature of the game, it's not unusual for two backs to get injured. Like, the HIA, that takes players out of the game, and then there's the genuine injuries. So I've never been a fan of it in terms of that. I think the risks are too high. It has worked certainly for some teams, but it's fine until it goes wrong. And let's say that game was a tight game last weekend and they ended up with a forward in the back line and Ireland split them open on a starter play and scored under the sticks. We'd be saying, how stupid was that? No, it didn't hurt them, but you never know. And I just think it's actually a broader point on it. I think World Rugby have to step in here, because the whole bench system was around having replacements, a number of replacements across forwards and backs. And of course, Rosie Erasmus, as he's entitled to do, and I have no problem doing it, he's taking advantage of the law that says you can pick 7-1. But we do have regulations around bench players. You have to have 3 front rows. So the World Rugby could in the morning say you have to have 3 backs on your bench. That would solve it. And then we go back to normality. But while this exists, this is going to be teams unloading a fresh pack, with 30 minutes on the clock, and it turning into a barroom brawl. And I don't think that's great for the game, but that's maybe a discussion for another day.
Yeah, short of a World Rugby edict, I think what it'll take is a moment like we saw last weekend with a flanker in the backline and getting cut to pieces. Obviously, you knew it was going to be France's day when Oscar Jegu was dribbling grubber kicks in behind the cover and pinning Ireland back. He looked unbelievably comfortable there. But I know, Cian, I think you have a flight to catch shortly to get to Rome. And Eddie, I know it's pretty early on the east coast of America, so we might wrap up there. Thanks so much for joining me, and we'll talk to you guys soon.